Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the witnesses for your testimony. And there have been a lot of things illuminated here in this discussion and testimony and the Q&A afterwards. I think there's a place to go that we ought to examine from a public policy standpoint, and it caught my interest when I see Mr. McAdams' testimony on the F-16s. And I'll tell the narrative as I know it and then ask you to respond accordingly. I happen to have be in a position where some of this information comes into my ears that doesn't get published, and I'll tell it the way is this way: is that the Pentagon decided that they wanted to have, by my narrative, an F-18 that they would fly at Mach 1 and do so on biofuels. And so in order to create the biofuels necessary for the biojet fuel, a 50-50 blend, biodiesel and regular jet fuel, they didn't want to apparently take a few thousand gallons from a regular biodiesel producer, but instead went to Pennsylvania to raise some algae in the dark that came from the bottom of the ocean where the sun doesn't penetrate, and in tanks with an individual there that had the skills and the ability to do that. And then they needed to feed it something, so they found some condemned sugar from sugarcane in Louisiana, took it to Pennsylvania, fed it to the algae, looked around to see how do we extrude the biodiesel out of this algae. Well, let's send it to Iowa, and we extrude the biodiesel. They did that, shipped it out to Edwards Air Force Base, put it in an F-16, and flew it at Mach 1. Now, it seems to me to be a lot of let's say, gyrations to go through. It appears that they wanted to avoid the criticism of food versus fuel. As I listen to the testimony here in the Q&A, I haven't heard that come up. I'm concerned that that could be a significant barrier within the mind of the administration if the Pentagon itself could go to such great lengths to accomplish something that would have been done much easier in far less period of time. Mr. McAdams, do you have any experience with that? Do you have a comment on that?
I'm very aware of the certification process of the military. I've been working very closely as an association head on behalf of my members with the military, the Air Force, and the Navy. We are incredibly supportive of the MOU that was released last year that calls for funding the $510 million program between the Department of Energy, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and the Department of Defense.
Are they wasting money trying to avoid the food versus fuel argument?
I would say our association supports a technology and feedstock neutral approach. I would be delighted to share with you the letter that we gave to Senator McCain on this subject about 3 weeks ago in reference to his questions to our association on how that matter went down.
Is it your understanding that it went down any differently than I described it?
I'm not sure I know that example. They recently did a 450,000-gallon purchase. That also involved an algae company.
But use the expression feedstock neutral.
Well, when I use the expression feedstock neutral, what I'm talking about is if you scope a specific solicitation and you require something specifically, that's not feedstock neutral. And so what you have a propensity to do is you're trying to pick a feedstock winner, right? And so our association's been feedstock neutral since the beginning. What you were talking about was a specific remat to use a percentage of algae in a specifically made jet fuel. And let me just correct you on one thing with all due respect, sir. You can't use biodiesel to make jet. Biodiesel has an oxygen in it. It's 11% oxygen. So when you make jet fuel, you're going to use a hydrocarbon only. Jet fuel is the most narrowly prescriptive fuel coming out of the oil industry or coming out of the renewable industry. So it's a very tightly confined spec.
Is it possible to process the biodiesel so that you can use it?
You can take.
And is it more cost effective than the method I described?
You could take the feedstock, right, and you could take Ralph's catfish oil, or you could take white greases or brown greases, and depending on the technology you use, which is generally hydroprocessing and isomerization, you can make a jet fuel out of renewables. You can also take oils out of algae and process it into a jet fuel. The cost of the range of feedstocks varies. They're not all the same cost.
I would think it would be substantially higher in the method that I described.
I think
and it just certainly would be
correct.
Thank you. And there's more to be drilled into here, but I wanted to turn to Mr. Thomas before I ran out of time, because you intrigued me with 10 feet of catfish fat on a 100 by 300 foot area. That's, I don't know, 1,000, 1,100 cubic yards of fat from where I come from. That's a lot of fat, and I didn't think of catfish as being fat.
They kill a lot of catfish.
And it just is intriguing to me that we have 30% of our young people are obese, even to the point where the former Secretary of Defense said it was a national security issue. And if we can process, and we're all innovators here, so if we can process, this is a bit of a facetious question, you can see it coming, but if we can process catfish fat into energy, biodiesel for example, has anybody given any thought on how you convert all that extra human weight that the First Lady's trying to reduce into something that could be usable energy?
I think I've seen a movie on that where they turned it into soap, but it was, no, there is a lot of fat in the catfish industry is shrinking. Number one, due to the changing taste of the consumers trying to reduce their fat, as well as cheaper exports coming out of Southeast Asia. So every catfish plant is trying to grab a bigger piece of a shrinking pie. So that industry is in dire straits.
It is true that we had a surgeon in California that was collecting that human fat and converting it into biodiesel and burning it in his car. And someone thought there was an ethical problem with that. I did not. I thought it was a pretty good utilization of human energy. So my clock has run out, and I thank all the witnesses, and I yield back the balance of my time, Mr. Chairman.